The gauze was wrapped in a clumsy headdress. Dark fluid had dried on the fabric. It was not a medical application. It was shrinkage. They found her on August 14, 1952. A highway patrolman named Officer Nelson spotted a figure walking along the shoulder of Route 66, 10 miles west of Barstow. She was wearing a slip that didn't belong to her in one shoe. She wasn't hitchhiking, she was stumbling. When Nelson pulled over, he noted she didn't react to the siren. She just kept walking, staring at the asphalt. The woman, later identified as subject Jane Doe, was alive but catatonic. Officer Nelson's initial report described a headdress of bandages wrapped clumsily around her skull. The gauze was soaked through. Dark fluid had dried on her neck and shoulders. He asked her name. She didn't speak. He opened the passenger door. She climbed in and sat with her hands folded in her lap, shaking violently. At the San Bernardino County Hospital, doctors removed the bandages. The procedure took 2 hours. The attending physician, Dr. Aris, noted in his file that the injury was not impact trauma. It was surgical. An incision had been made from the left temple to the right, circling the back of the cranium. The scalp had been removed. The tissue was gone. The bone was exposed but clean. Sheriff Norris took over the case the next morning. The survivor couldn't speak, but she could point. She traced a line on a map of the highway, tapping a finger on a stretch of road near the Mojave River wash. She wouldn't look at the photos of local motels. She just kept tapping the same empty spot on the map. Norris sent 2 units to the coordinates. The units found the Dusty Pines Motor Lodge 3 miles from the survivor's indicated point. It was a 6-unit structure with a detached office and a residence in the back. The sign said, "Vacancy." The parking lot was empty. A 1948 Ford truck registered to the owners, Raymond and Ruby Ross, was missing. The office door was unlocked. A pot of coffee on the burner was cold. The search began at 9 a.m. Deputies moved room to room. Units 1, 2, and 4 were standard. Beds made, towels folded, Gideon Bibles in the drawers. It looked like a functioning business. Unit 3 was different. The door had been reinforced with a steel plate bolted to the interior wood. The lock was reversed. It required a key to exit, not to enter. Inside Unit 3, the furniture had been removed. In its place stood a heavy iron medical table bolted to the floorboards. Leather straps were attached to the corners. They were worn smooth from use. Beside the table, a metal cart held a tray of surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, a bone saw. Everything had been boiled and laid out on sterile cloth. On the bedside table, investigators found a brown glass bottle labeled Nerve Tonic. Lab analysis later confirmed it was a mixture of laudanum and high-proof grain alcohol. A half-empty cup sat on the floor. The residue matched the bottle. This was the intake mechanism. Guests were sedated before they were moved to the table. There was no struggle. Sheriff Norris ordered a full sweep of the grounds. The search extended to the residence behind the office. The kitchen was clean. Dishes were in the rack. It looked like the Rosses had left in a hurry, perhaps alerted by the survivor's escape. In the living room, a sewing machine sat on a work table by the window. The needle was still threaded with fine, clear gut. The workspace was specialized. On the shelves, deputies found wooden blockheads, mannequin forms used for millinery. But these weren't for hats. Each block was labeled with a piece of masking tape. Blonde, fine. Red, thick. Gray, coarse. Tacks were hammered into the wood, holding mesh caps in place. The craftsmanship was undeniable. It was professional. Then they found the inventory. In a cedar chest at the foot of the master bed, wrapped in wax paper, were 5 pieces. They weren't just hair. They were scalps. The origin was unmistakable. The hair was still attached to the skin. But the tanning was uneven, the stitching loose. These were the rejects. The ones that hadn't met Ruby's rigorous standards. The shipping receipts were in a cigar box under the counter. They detailed transactions spanning 5 years. The destination address was a shop in Los Angeles called the Gilded Comb. The items were listed as European imports, raw material. The prices were exorbitant, $300 per unit. The Rosses weren't collectors, they were manufacturers. The investigation shifted to the exterior. The geography of the lot was flat, baking in the August heat. But the ground behind the motel was uneven. A flash flood 2 days prior, the same storm that likely allowed the survivor to escape, had scoured the wash behind the property. The water had cut a new channel through the sand, exposing what lay beneath. Deputy Morgan found the first bone at noon. It was a femur, bleached white by the lye, but unmistakable. The pit was 10 feet deep and 20 feet wide. The Rosses had used industrial caustic soda to break down the organic material. The slurry at the bottom was thick with calcium deposits. Forensics arrived from San Bernardino. Over the next 3 days, they sifted the pit. They cataloged the remains of at least 22 individuals. The demographic profile was consistent. Transients, solo travelers, people who paid cash and wouldn't be missed for weeks. The biological separation was absolute. The bodies in the pit had no hair. The meticulous nature of the operation disturbed the coroner. The separation of the scalp wasn't crude. It was surgical. The cuts followed the hairline perfectly. The temporal arteries had been ligated to minimize bleeding during the procedure. Perhaps they believed a living donor would provide better texture. The coroner did not speculate further. Sheriff Norris contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. Detectives raided the Gilded Comb on August 18th. The owner claimed ignorance. He showed invoices for high-quality theatrical wigs. He admitted the hair was superior to anything else on the market. It held a curl better. It had a natural luster. He had sold them to studios, to private clients, to theater companies. Back at the motel, evidence of the couple's division of labor emerged. The heavy lifting, the digging, the lye, the disposal, was consistent with male strength markers found on the shovel handles. The sewing, the chemical treatment of the skin, the delicate needlework, that was the wife. Ruby Ross was the artisan. Raymond was the janitor. The survivor, still in the hospital, began to draw. She sketched a woman with a soft face and hard hands. She drew a cup of tea. She drew the table. She didn't draw a monster. She drew a nurse, a caregiver who stroked her hair and told her she had such beautiful texture before the darkness took her. The search for Raymond and Ruby Ross expanded to 3 states. Sightings were reported in Nevada, Arizona, and Mexico. A waitress in Kingman swore she served a couple matching their description. The woman had admired the waitress's braid. The man had paid in cash. But by the time police arrived, the trail was cold. Investigators dismantled the sewing room. They found a ledger of sorts, not names, but physical descriptions. Subject 12, auburn 24 inches, minimal gray. Subject 15, black, coarse, 18 inches. Beside each entry was a date and a price. The final entry was dated August 13th, 1952. Subject 23, damage during extraction, discarded. The Subject 23 entry matched the timeline of the survivor. The unfinished procedure explained why she was alive. She hadn't been finished. The cut was clean, but incomplete, likely interrupted. The bleeding had been uncontrolled. They had dumped her assuming she would die of exposure or blood loss in the desert. They underestimated her. The depravity wasn't just in the pit. It was in the commerce. Norris found a photograph in the workshop, tucked into a frame. It showed a famous actress at a 1950 premiere. She was smiling, waving to the crowd. Her hair was piled high in an intricate, glamorous style. On the back of the photo, Ruby Ross had written one word: mine. The realization hit the investigation team. The European imports weren't sitting in a box. They were walking around. They were on movie screens. They were attending galas. The hair of 17 murdered transients had been woven into the cultural fabric of Hollywood. The trophies were hiding in plain sight, admired by millions. The LAPD attempted to track the sold units. It was impossible. The wigs had been restyled, dyed, cut, and resold. They were in prop houses. They were in private collections. The owner of the wig shop had records of sales, but no records of returns. The product was durable. It lasted. By September, the Dusty Pines Motor Lodge was boarded up. The pit was filled in with concrete. The case remained open, but the leads vanished. The Rosses had simply evaporated into the highway system they knew so well. They had cash. They had a vehicle. They had a skill set that was portable. The survivor remained in the state institution in San Bernardino. She never spoke again. The trauma had severed her connection to language. She spent her days sitting by the window, wearing a knit cap the nurses gave her. She refused to look in mirrors. If she saw her reflection, she would scream until she passed out. In 1954, a noir film was released. The lead actress wore a stunning blonde wig. A production assistant on the set later gave an interview, mentioning the actress had complained about the hairpiece. She said it felt heavy. She said that under the hot studio lights, it smelled faintly of almonds. The police file noted a sighting in 1955 near Albuquerque. A couple running a roadside stand selling handmade leather goods. A tourist reported the woman staring at a young woman's long hair with an intensity that made her leave without buying anything. The report was filed, but never verified. The Dusty Pines stood empty for a decade. In 1962, the property was sold and demolished to widen the interstate. The contractor found a metal box buried under the foundation of the residence. Inside was a single braid of dark hair, tied with a red ribbon. It wasn't inventory, it was a keepsake. Sheriff Norris retired in 1965. He kept the matchbook from the Dusty Pines in his desk drawer. He told his deputy that the Rosses didn't stop. They just moved. They changed the product. Maybe they switched to leather, maybe bone. But the commerce continued. Supply and demand. The European imports label became a ghost story in the industry. Wig makers checked their stock. Some pieces were quietly burned, but others remained. High-quality human hair doesn't decay. like flesh. It persists. It retains its shine. The survivor died in 1978. The autopsy revealed nothing remarkable, other than the old scarring on the skull. The skin had healed tight and white against the bone. The doctor noted that the surgical precision of the original wound had allowed for perfect closure. It was the work of an expert. The location is now a stretch of asphalt on Interstate 40. Thousands of cars pass over it every day. Drivers don't know they're speeding over the site of the Lye Pit. They don't know that the foundation of the westbound lane rests on the packed earth where 22 people were reduced to calcium. A wig matching the description of the Subject 12 entry surfaced at an auction in 1982. It was attributed to the estate of a silent film star. The catalog described it as late 40s, exceptional quality, unknown origin. It sold for $3,000. The buyer was anonymous. No death certificates were ever issued for Raymond or Ruby Ross. No graves bear their names. As far as the state of California is concerned, they are still driving that 1948 Ford, looking for guests who pay cash and travel alone. The most disturbing piece of evidence was found years later in the stored files of the Gilded comb. A letter from Ruby Ross, dated 1951. "The new batch is exceptional," she wrote. "The harvest was plentiful this season. The desert air preserves the texture. Send more ribbons." The letter confirmed what Norris had always suspected. They didn't see themselves as killers. They saw themselves as farmers. The guests were livestock. The motel was the pen. The highway was the grazing land. The image of the actress in the photograph remains the enduring symbol of the case. A woman smiling at a camera, wearing the scalp of a murder victim, unaware that she was an accessory to the crime. The beauty was the grotesque reality. The glamour was the grave. Forensic analysis of the hair strands from the recovered braid in 1962 showed trace elements of the same sedative found in the survivor's toxicology report. The hair had grown while the subject was being poisoned. The record of their suffering was written in the keratin itself. The investigation is technically inactive. The evidence boxes are stored in the basement of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Box 4 contains the 5 patches of hair found in the chest. They are still soft. They still shine under the fluorescent lights. To this day, collectors of vintage Hollywood memorabilia check the lining of period wigs. They look for a specific stitching pattern, a tiny cross-hatched suture that marks the work of Ruby Ross. Every few years a report comes in: a motel in Texas, a boarding house in Oregon, a couple who takes too much interest in a guest's physical attributes. But nothing ever sticks. The trail ended at the Dusty Pines. The wig on the actress's head in that 1954 film is still out there, somewhere, resting on a styrofoam head in a dusty attic, waiting to be worn again. The hair remembers.